Hey everyone, welcome back to the Engage podcast. Ryan Argenta here, your host. We have a ton of information to cover today, and to help me wade through the sea of information, I'm here with Rich Wheeler, the MEC Executive Administrator, and Josh Cantrell, the Vice Chairman of the Scheduling Committee. Gentlemen, thanks for being here and welcome back to the Engage podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
You bet. So again, a ton of information to cover. We're talking quick slips, some scheduling shenanigans, and really how we got here with MOU 2505, with this new quick slip coming out February 25th as a marker, and then March 2nd. Some of the nuts and bolts from the scheduling committee on things you've heard, 23M7, out of base white slips, pilots going after pilots about certain things, auto accept, ARCOS, batch sizes. I mean, there's just a sea of information here. It's nothing new, but we're still talking about this. And I will point back to an Engage alert that discusses the MOU 2505, which talks about quick slips, which talks about the suspension of sick look back. So I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that to fully understand the MOU 2505 and its implications. I want to highlight or draw attention to the fact that we have two powerhouses on today. We have Rich Wheeler, who's the Executive Administrator, which is a fancy word for the MEC Chairman's right-hand man. One of, there's two. And the importance of that is he is an encyclopedia of contract awareness, contract specialization. He has been a negotiator. He's been in the business for a long time. And now he sits next to the MEC Chairman and speaks on his behalf, or can speak on his behalf, both with the company and with the pilot group. And so adding that weight is Josh Cantrell, the Vice Chairman of the Scheduling Committee. And so it's kind of like, why are you both on this show? What message do you want to send to pilots? And what is going on? Why are we still talking about this? Rich, I want to go to you first.
Sure. We look back and we looked at the operation back in 2024. Everything seemed to be running pretty smooth. No big hiccups. And then as we got into 2025, especially towards the later end, we get into 26, obviously, where we are now. And somewhere around the third quarter, fourth quarter of 25, things just seem to go absolutely insane. A lot of people talking about open time and the processing in open time. But I think one of the things that people sometimes overlook when we're talking about open time is, why is there so much of it, and why are there not enough pilots to cover it? We have a very large open time window. It gets published on the 20th or the month prior. It's when PCS opens. We have a system for folks to pick up time at straight pay and then opportunities to pick it up at double pay. How is it that we wind up with so much open time? And that is a question we are still looking for the answers to. With the mechanisms that we have, certainly just to take a quick sidebar, our open time is handled in two different ways. First of all, there's PCS, and I know that is kind of a confusing term because you go into iCrew and you put in a PCS slip, whether it's a white slip, green slip, or what have you. And everybody just kind of thinks it's all handled the same way, but it's not. Up until the second day, it's all handled automatically by the computer. No scheduler takes a look at it. It is all processed automatically. There is no notification period. There's no accept period. It's just if a trip hits your slip, the specifications that you put on your slip, it's your trip. That's it. And you get a text message or a CNO call that says, hey, you've been assigned this trip. Once we get in past second day, that's what we kind of colloquial call manual trip coverage. And this is where the only time that the trip ladder comes into play, and everybody by now, I'm sure, is plenty of information about the trip ladder. So until we get into that second day period, open time can flow right out. And it's only once we get into the second day period. Now, just as a quick history lesson for those who have joined us since 2023, it used to be that this open time was covered same day, next day. In other words, if a rotation departed today or tomorrow, it would be handled through trip coverage. One of the requests that were made by the company during our last negotiations was to expand that window so that they have more time to manage this open time that is closer in. That is one of the things that we found mutually acceptable. So we agreed to open that aperture to the second day. Ironically, it doesn't seem to have helped any. It just seems to have added another 24 hours to the chaos, because when the automated PCS system seems to function prior to manual trip coverage, it does so pretty reliably. It's up there in the 99%. I know when I was sitting in Josh's position, if somebody called in and say, "Hey, PCS is wrong," we'd go in and take a look, and I would say 99 times out of 100, no, it was correct. So, so the question remains: where does all this open time coming from? Why was it we were able to operate the airline in 2024 without so much drama? And why is it the weird kind of sideshow that we have right now? And it actually comes from two factors. I mean, first of all, we simply don't have enough pilots. And this is a whole other podcast that everyone is free to listen to, but I'll give you the super abbreviated version: is that the staffing formula that is in the contract does not account for some of our more modern contract provisions, the amount of time we get for training, amount of time we get for vacation. So it chronically understaffs the airline, which would be fine if the company recognized this fact and said, "Oh, heck, we need more pilots than what the staffing formula provides." And instead, they seem to be using it as a goal rather than a guideline. And they've certainly known about the inaccuracy for a very long time. So we start out the month without enough pilot. And when PCS runs, of course, it has to use the actual values for vacation and training and whatnot. And so at the end of the PDS run, it builds more lines than the formula anticipated. And so you wind up chronically short of reserves. You wind up chronically short of pilots. And you also wind up with more open time in the system than you might ordinarily have. So, but that's all manageable with PCS. You would think it would go out as white slips, it'd go out as silver slips, as the case may be. But we still roll into that second day period where manual trip coverage takes over you would think you'd want that number to be zero, right? Because you have these other mechanisms to handle the flying. Instead, they roll over into manual trip coverage with already quite a bit of open time. And then on top of everything else, now you have the continual helmet fire that's happening inside of manual trip coverage. And certainly trips fall into open time for a number of reasons. Sick calls. I mean, people do obviously get sick. It happens. People call in sick and the trip falls into open time. But that's not where a majority of that time comes from. That's only a fraction. And so where does the other open time come from? That is probably a question best left to the company. As best we can see, it happens from a number of reasons. Company wants to break a trip up. They don't want to utilize reserves a certain way. So they'll take a 5-day trip, which they could certainly assign to a reserve pilot who has 5 days available. And then they break it up into a 2-day trip and a 3-day trip, or a 3-day trip and a 3-day trip, because whenever you do that, you're adding inefficiencies to the system. And so they toss that into open time rather than trying to use a reserve, which ironically is what the reserve is for. I was doing a little bit of research for the podcast here today, and I look back in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't even called open time. It was called reserve time, because the trips that were left over were assigned to reserves. That's what they were there for. So, and then we have some new reroute rules. So trips need to go into open time that way. And so we are generating a lot more open time than, certainly not through the fault of the pilots, but through the company's actions. And the system as it existed, if it was managed correctly, could certainly handle that kind of throughput. The company has decided to go a different way with that, maybe a little tight on the staffing and crew scheduling, and maybe a little less than optimal investment in information technology services. So we're left with a system that we have that certainly gets plugged up when we need to get going. So that is kind of the both ends of the equation. And I will definitely want to emphasize to your listeners, this is a two-step problem. It is not just the amount of flow through the current coverage letter we have. Coverage letter works fine. We saw that even as recently as 2024, 2025. If the open time levels are at historical norms, then the system works just fine. If you try to force more open time into the system, it's going to get hung up. And the important part to recognize there, this is not through pilot action, but this is strictly through the level of open time that the company wants to try to force through the system. The idea is that you want enough pilots on your property to handle down flying, and reserves are there for the fires that happen. We've kind of gone in the other direction here, so it is what it is, unfortunately.
This is why I refer to Rich as an encyclopedia. I just let you run there. Take a breather and gather yourself. But that was a vast history and a ton of information to kind of bring pilots up to speed of why we're here and why we're seeing these free-for-alls with, M7s and skipping steps of coverage. Inverse assignments have been popular with the company. So what I'm hearing from you, Rich, is there's a long history of contracts and building on past contracts and changing things. And obviously our last contract, we had a number of changes with reroutes and how open time is handled and Arcos batch sizes, because pilots were annoyed with nuisance calls in the middle of the night where you're number 99 of 100 in a batch size. And then we have auto accept and auto acknowledge. And so there are things that have become part of our contract or part of our system because of things in the past. And like you said, if you're new or you've been here since 2023, or perhaps you've forgotten, I guess ask yourself, like, why do we have this? Why do we have out of base white slips? Where did it come from? Rich is the man to answer those questions. But while he takes a breath and a drink of water after that amazing introduction, what I'm hearing is we're flying more trips than we have adequate staffing for. The staffing formula doesn't count for some of the newer contract items that we have. And that this is also how the company is choosing to run flight operations, right? It's their company. They can run it how they want. But this is some of the fallout or some of the byproducts of not being adequately staffed and running it in the way that they're currently running it.
Yeah, Ryan, you're absolutely correct. You put the quarter in the jukebox, you got to let the whole song play, right? Overtime flying really wasn't a thing at Delta until probably the early 80s. And certainly the contracts didn't reflect any of that. If you were to pull up a contract, say from 1990, the scheduling section would be pretty unrecognizable to what we see today. The trip coverage ladder as we know it today didn't really manifest itself onto C2K. But I think the important thing to realize is inverse assignments have been around in the contract for a long time, even predates green slips, predates a lot of things. This was a mechanism for the company to force someone to go fly. And that was always a bad thing. There was always restrictions, or at least we tried to get restrictions on it. And when you go looking at 23R, which is the section that covers inverse assignments, it reads kind of backwards if you are just looking out there for just normal, ordinary, generic open time that you want to get premium with. It doesn't really work the way you think it works because it was designed for preventative measures. That's the way the leveling system works the way it does. It was not designed to be a typical award that, hey, I'm raising my hand for super premium flying. It was designed to prevent you from getting assigned flying that you don't want. And so with that, I will hand it off to Josh, who has got much more current history on it.
And so, Josh, talk to me about the inverse assignment, the mechanism itself. Why does the company love inverse assignments at the moment? Let's start there.
Sure. Inverse assignment, how we currently have it, or we know it to exist, where you receive a blast call, and then it's basically just saying, this trip is available. Please reach back out to scheduling if you'd like to fly it. Has existed for a number of years, and the company has used it. It's just the number of times they use it has exploded over the past 6 to 9 months. The current system of inverse assignment, I believe, is pilot friendly in how it functions. We don't always want to be inversely assigned into flying. There's almost no true inverse assignment anymore among the Delta pilot group. However, the entire system of trip coverage, I believe no one would say it is functioning how it's intended to function in the contract. So we have the system where pilots are inputting slips to fly rotations. The contractual mechanisms of the times, the offer windows, and the award windows within Arcos can get quite lengthy. And with long trip coverage reports of lots of pilots wanting to fly trips, it takes a while to run through that trip coverage. scheduling eventually gets tired of trying to exhaust the trip coverage list, and contractually inside of 8 hours to report, they can use 23M7 to skip to another step of trip coverage to accomplish schedule integrity to cover the trip faster. The prime way they do that now is by skipping to inverse assignment. So they get to the 8 hour mark or less sometimes, and closer to report, they run an inverse assignment blast call, and the first pilot to call them back is awarded the trip. We see this in open time constantly. When they do that, they're supposed to update the 23M7 roster in iCrew. So they're pay protecting a 23M7 pilot, and then the inverse assignment pilot is also receiving their pay. You hit on this, Ryan, with the senior pilots who receive a lot of this 23M7 pay. And eventually when they fill up their white slip pickup loan for the month, that pay can cascade down to more junior pilots. But the pilots that end up flying as inverse assignments kind of vary throughout the seniority list. But it certainly lends itself to kind of no man's land for pilots who get to fly these inverse assignments. They're too junior to receive 23M7 pay, but they're also too senior or just not fast enough on the phones to get on the line with through scheduling to actually fly these inverse assignments. So it's taking away the seniority factor, and I fully understand the frustration of a lot of pilots, which has led us to the discussion we had surrounding MOU 2505 and then the advent of quick slips that will take place starting on March 2nd.
Yeah. And before we dive into quick slips, which I'm sure everybody wants to get into, and you've either found the fast forward button or, you put it on 1.5 times and we'll get there. But I think before we dive into that quick slip, it's important for pilots to understand that this is a long history. This is an inherent problem. Again, stemming, like Rich said, staffing combined with extra flying, which is good. The company's killing it right now, and we want that, right? But it also creates some loopholes and unintended effects, and that kind of brings us to where we are. So you answered it in terms of sometimes we see trips sitting in open time for what appears to be a long time. And what I'm gathering from what you've said is they're running trip coverage. They have to go through, in-base white slips, out-of-base white slips, green slips. They have to go through each of those steps. And with everybody putting in for these slips or these trips, potentially it could take hours, right? And at some point they've got to cut it off and just go cover the trip and get it done. Is that why we're seeing these trips sit in open time with no action or no seeming action?
Yes. So we have worked with the IT committee and the Delta MEC IT committee to kind of understand a lot of our trip coverage problems. They pull some big data for us, run some numbers for us, and give us a lot of really solid information. We've discovered that from a trip, the time it hits open time until when crew scheduling hits the first button, runs the first trip coverage report, the average time for all of 2025 was 23 minutes. So the dwell time for a rotation to actually begin coverage on was 23 minutes in 2025 out of the hundreds of thousands of manually covered rotations. Now that's for the first step. Coverage is not their problem. It's only the close-in same-day flying that they run into the most, hence them using 23M7 inside of 8 hours to cover these. In larger categories, Atlanta 320 or 73, where you have, 600 or 700 pilots in a seat, if there's 75 pilots on a white flip or out of base white flip, do the math, 75 times 12, that's a long time to potentially run through trip coverage to not even cover it. So they will be running trip coverage for numerous hours. And then when it reaches that 8 hour point, oftentimes that's when scheduling will determine that they need to use 23M7 and just get it over with to send it to inverse assignment to have that rotation covered. We do see on the whole, there's a large attempt by the company to follow the coverage ladder, but inside of 8 hours, the easy button is inverse assignment. And that is a very common thing for them.
I think this is a good time to pivot. Josh, let's go back to you. Tell me about what we've all been waiting to hear is about this new quick slip and how it will interact with trip coverage, how pilots can submit these quick slips. I do want to point to the scheduling alert 26-01, which talks about quick slips. That was published on February 20th, and really great publication there, Josh, because there's screenshots, there's great explanation, but Talk to me about quick slips and kind of where we're going and how this helps us moving forward.
The overall thrust of MAU 2505 in regards to trip coverage was, how do we organize the inverse assignment chaos? We have pilots getting up inverse assignment blast calls, clamoring over themselves to call in to receive those inverse assignments, or they're talking to schedulers and the scheduler goes, hey, while I have you on the phone, I actually do have some other trips if you want to go fly these other trips, right? It introduces a lot of kind of perilous activity where pilots are unaware of like this whole deal making discussions we've had in the past podcasts about deal making. It's going to do away with all of that, or at least is the hope. Whereas quick slips is a step of trip coverage and manual trip coverage in 23N and O, where scheduling can start at the beginning of the coverage ladder, go all the way down and reach quick slips naturally. We foresee mostly that they will be using quick slips in lieu of the inverse assignment tool. So inside of 8 hours to report, we foresee the company using 23M7 to skip to the quick slip step of coverage and cover the rotation via quick slips. So quick slips, it's a premium pay designation for a rotation where, similar to green slips or inverse assignments, you're going to have an additional 100% pay for the flying you do on top of your original rotation guarantee for regular pilots, or 100% pay no credit for reserve pilots on their X days, and normal pay and credit for reserve pilots on their on-call days. It is subject to a leveling mechanism, just like green slips. So once you have flown your first quick slip, you can get quick slip number 2 until all the other pilots in your category have been offered quick slip number 1, or there's no pilots that are available and you're there for quick slip number 2. It lives in Arcos, right? So this is manual trip coverage, same day, next day, second day coverage. You'll receive a quick slip phone call via Arcos. What's important to note with this is, with green slips or white slips, we have a 2-step process. We have an offer window and an award window, both 12 minutes long. Quick slips, we will have a single award window only. Very, very heavy foot stomp, 1 award window only. Once that window is done, there is no changing your mind. If you're the senior most pilot who acknowledged that rotation in the quick slip step, you are obligated to fly that rotation. There are no batch sizes associated with quick slips. So you have to input quick slips in your PCS request for quick slips. Has all the same parameters as you would with green slips. You can have do not call hours. You can request rotation starting with deadhead only, just like any other normal PCS request. But the award windows will blast all pilots who have a valid slip in that meet the parameters of that rotation. So it will not be uncommon in large categories to have, you could be pilot number 80 on the quick slip award roster, and pilot number 1 can acknowledge the award and fly that quick slip. So you won't be bombarded with annoying inverse assignment calls at all hours of the night. You're in control of your do not call hours. You're in control of whether you input quick slips or not, or the parameters you set for those quick slips. But once that single 12-minute award window is done, trip coverage should be complete for that rotation, and you are obligated to fly it if you were awarded it in Arcos.
Controlled chaos instead of uncontrolled.
Yes, this is a way to silo all the chaos that's going on. It restores seniority order to the trip coverage process. Senior pilots will, instead of playing the phone game and race into who can dial back the fastest or press star the fastest, will be called with a quick slip, single 12-minute award window. And if they want to fly the rotation, they will acknowledge their award and it will be placed on their line at the end of that 12-minute window.
Josh, are quick slips only in base, or is there such a thing as an out of base quick slip?
Quick slips are only for in base. There's no such thing as an out of base quick slip. This is a replacement for the inverse assignment call. Inverse assignments are only in base. So we felt it appropriate to only add quick slips as an in base mechanism at this point.
So let me ask you this. If scheduling still skips steps of coverage and goes to the quick slip, are there still 23M7 payouts to the affected pilot?
Yes.
Yeah. So if pilots are upset that, senior pilot Smith drops their entire schedule and just soaks up 23M7, this is not going to solve that issue, if you will, right? So 23M7 is still going to happen. scheduling will have to decide at some point to skip steps of coverage or to stop steps of coverage and go to a quick slip. And then you may be the recipient of a quick slip. That's where the controlled chaos and the leveling mechanism and seniority is respected, but there still is an affected pilot, whether that's a white slip or an out-of-base white slip or a green slip. There is an affected pilot that'll still get that M7 payout. This just adds some structure to the free-for-all that has become inverse assignment.
Yes, the usage of 23M7 is still available. It's still a contractual mechanism for scheduling to deviate from the coverage ladder to cover rotations. It's important to note that there is contractual language where they cannot skip to inverse assignment. They must use quick slip in lieu of inverse assignment. So if they want to use 23M7, 6-hour final report, they need to skip to quick slip. They're still allowed to skip to green slip, like any earlier steps, but they can't go straight to inverse assignment. They must use quick slips to execute 23M7.
So inverse assignments are not going away. They're just further down the line. This is a must stop step of coverage.
Yes, inverse assignments still exist in the coverage ladder, and then there's emergency coverage that I'll talk about in just a second, but it still exists. It's just if the company uses 23M7, they cannot skip past quick slip. They must use quick slip. That's the kind of the doorstop of 23M7. They're all still required to pay protect pilots when they use 23M7. If you're the senior most white slip pilot or out-of-base white slip pilot or green slip pilot, you will be due 23M7 pay. And then the pilot who's awarded a quick slip will be paid contractually, whether they're regular or res as appropriate. Talking about the emergency coverage amended language in section 23M7 Delta, M7D. Emergency trip coverage is kind of slang. It's the last step in the trip coverage ladder of any available pilot in position. Where we see this is it's 1 hour to report in Honolulu and a pilot 6 out. We know we have Delta pilots that live in Honolulu, or scheduling knows we have pilots that live in Honolulu. In cases like that, they're allowed to use emergency trip coverage to have pilots like that already in position where they live to fly a rotation or fly that flight segment. However, they are required to contractually build a rotation and pay protect pilots for that. So if the company chooses to use this emergency trip step with the new language in 23M7 Delta, they are actually required to pay we'll call it a normal 23M7 pilot. So they're required to pay a white slip pilot for that. They are also now required to pay a quick slip pilot for that when they invoke emergency trip coverage. So 100% to the white slip or green slip pilot, 100% to the quick slip pilot, and then inverse assignment pay to the emergency trip coverage pilot. So talking 400% pay for a rotation.
So this is expensive for the company, but it allows them the tools, the controlled tools to run the company.
Very much so. We don't want to hinder Delta Airlines from running their airline. This is just a mechanism that allowed them to run their airline, cover a flight that they need to, but still pay protect the appropriate pilots.
Okay, very good. That's a great overview. Again, I want to point to the scheduling alert. Check your email inboxes. You can also look at the Delta MEC Telegram app and find that. And that's the scheduling alert 26-01. And it's really very good. Not too much in the weeds, gives great screenshots, shows you how it looks. It even explains how it'll be paid out and how it should look on your time card and your schedule. So check that out. And while you're there, go back to the Engage alert, which was on November 4th about MOU 2505. So check those out for the details or the nuances of quick slip, and good luck to everybody. I mean, this is money-making season, although it's February, it's usually not, but make hay, right?
Always.
Josh and or Rich, both of your opinions as we close this out, how is this going to help the pilot group with the chaos, or will it? Do you think this is a Band-Aid approach? Is this a great addition to our contract? Tell me your thoughts on that and how pilots can expect this to go forward.
I definitely don't think this is a Band-Aid. I think it is not a complete overhaul to the system. They are relatively minor changes to how the trip coverage system works. Functionally, it is still the same. Like I mentioned earlier, it's just organizing the chaos that was inverse assignment. This will direct everyone through Arcos. Arcos is the forensics on our end as the scheduling committee. It organizes the chaos. It restores seniority to the trip coverage process. And it still allows Delta to cover trips in a timely manner. They like that. It doesn't address their money problem necessarily. There's still going to be rampant use of 23M7, I believe, but that will remain to be seen come March 2nd, whenever the first quick slip will inevitably be awarded to a pilot.
Yeah, very good. And Rich, I want to end with you from the administration's perspective. What has become what we'll call scheduling shenanigans or this free-for-all? What's the administration's perspective? You talked staffing, you talked flying a really aggressive schedule, which is great for pilots. It's great for the company. It's great for the shareholders. What message do you want to send to the pilots as we close this out?
First of all, I agree with everything Josh said. I think big picture, what quick slips do is it recalibrates that step of coverage to the modern times. Inverse assignment was not designed for what it was being used for. Now we have transitioned to a seniority-based award process for, let's just call it last minute flying. And I think quick slips were the next logical step. From the administration's point of view, this does not solve the underlying structural issue at the airline, which is simply too much open time that could be handled in a completely different way.
Yeah, very good. This feels like a great addition for the pilots. It's another mechanism, another tool in our toolbox. And, one thing I love about this setup in our careers is there's flexibility. There's something for everyone. If you don't want to fly, you can drop your schedule and you don't necessarily have to fly. And if you want to fly more and make extra money, then there's opportunity for that. And so I think this is another mechanism for that. Obviously, the company will have to figure out how they want to run their operation, and that's theirs to do. So,
and Ryan, those are all awesome points. A quick aside, funny story is, so Josh and I had a meeting with the company this week. We're going into the GO where the flight operations is, and you're going through that one part of the simulator bay there where they have all these flags that says operational excellence, 270 days without a cancellation. And there's one for 2015, 2016, 2017. Ironically enough, that all came to a stop around 2018, where the company decided to focus their production of widgets, for lack of a better term, to different operational paradigm. And after 2018, you saw that operational excellence not be so excellent. We hear from management all the time that it's a premium brand. We make our money off premium passengers. This is the excellence that we need. And we're in the current staffing paradigm. That is not where we're at.
Yeah. And so now we're in a bit of turbulence, but, we give the company the opportunity to right the ship. And so we hope they'll do that. And in the meantime, we as pilots need to really stick together, support one another, and treat each other with kindness. And, point your frustration in the proper direction. So let's wrap there. Thanks to both of you for being here. Thanks for that vast amount of information. And so if you have questions about quick slips or trip coverage, submit an STS inquiry through the Delta MEC webpage. And, you can always reach out to your reps with questions, comments, or concerns. And send us a dart at the Engage podcast and let us know what you think. We can always point your concerns in the right direction. Rich Wheeler, the Executive Administrator for the Delta MEC, and Josh Cantrell, the Vice Chairman of the Scheduling Committee. Thank you both for being here, and thanks for staying on top of all this. This is some deep and heavy stuff for us, so thanks for that.
A pleasure. Thanks, Ryan.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.